Hi, Charles of Booksage here, and this is episode 1 of my 52-part Harry Potter reread series. Today I'm starting off with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, chapters 1 through 5. Now, before I get in, if you're wondering why am I doing a Harry Potter reread over a 52-week stretch, I will link to my video down below where I go over my announcement video and go over my original read of the story and why I'm doing my first time reread this way. All right, now let's begin. Now, the book opens up with chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. And one of the things that I wanted to see in this reread was how much of my memory of reading the books has been kind of morphed and warped by watching the movies dozens and dozens of times. And right off the bat, opening page, I forgot how much time J.K. Rowling spends with the Dursley family in the opening chapter. I'm so used to it opening up with Dumbledore and Hagrid and McGonagall and the baby Harry leaving it on the doorstep. But in the book, I completely forgot that we spent an entire day with Vernon Dursley, before we even get to that. And I think it's a smart way to open up the story. We're introduced to the Dursley family, Vernon, his wife Petunia, their little baby Dudley, and that they're normal as can be, and they like that, thank you very much kind of stuff. But they have a secret they're terrified people will discover, and that's the Potters. Lily Potter, in particular, who's Petunia's sister, and they don't want anybody to know about them. And she doesn't go into any details here about what's different and weird and strange about them, but obviously it's something that bothers them that much that they don't want anything to do with. And then the book opens up on what is actually the morning after Voldemort's attack on Lily and James Potter, which we learn about a couple of chapters from now. And we follow Vernon throughout his day, going to work, being at work at lunchtime, and he's noticing strange things happening. At first, there's a cat reading a map outside his house. He sees people walking around in these weird robes and owls and things flying around. And conversations and whispers of all these strangely dressed people. And during lunchtime, he hears the name Potter family and Harry. And he's worried about bringing this up to his wife because his wife doesn't want to hear anything about her sister and her sister's family. But once he watches the news and that there's been owls flying all over England, he brings it up. And we get our first inkling here that there's something else going on. And even though the Dursleys are this normal, everyday family, they want nothing strange in their life, you kind of know that there's something else out there. And they fear it and want nothing to do with it. And then after that, we finally get to the following evening where Albus Dumbledore arrives on the scene. And Dumbledore comes up onto the block, sees the cat, knows right away it's Professor McGonagall. And we're introduced to our first wizarding magic being used when McGonagall transforms back into a person. And then we're also introduced, interestingly, to the very first signs of wizarding technology, where Dumbledore pulls out the putter outer, as I think he refers to it in the book, and snuffs out the street lamps. Now, obviously, he could do this himself with his wizarding powers, but he chooses instead to use this little contraption. And then Hagrid arrives on his flying motorcycle. And this is a really interesting scene here, and I like the fact that we're introduced to Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Hagrid, the three adult pillars of Harry's wizarding life, at least in the beginning, once he finally does get off and go to Hogwarts. These are the three adults who are looking out for him the most, who he can trust completely, even though he may not realize it in the beginning. And I like that J.K. Rowling has chosen these three in particular to introduce us to the wizarding part of this story, and that they're the ones who are there that night for baby Harry, who's just survived what we learn about in a couple chapters from now. And Now, an interesting thing here, had this been an epic fantasy story, it would have opened up with Voldemort going to Godric's Hollow, the attack on the Potter house, the big battle and everything that happens. And that would have been a big opening chapter or 2 chapters, and it would be 500 pages before Harry even makes it to Hogwarts. But as it is, starts off as a children's story. So all that's left out. And I like the fact that it's left out. It works really, really well for these books, particularly in the beginning, because Voldemort's this sort of mysterious thing that they just don't even want to speak his name, even though they believe he's dead, but they're not sure. But he instills that much fear and dread in everybody that they're, even 10 years later, which is going to be book chapter 2, they're still afraid to say his name. And having Voldemort be this sort of nebulous, mysterious evil that seems to have been bested trying to kill Harry, I think works really well as an underpinning to the books, to the story as it begins to unfold. And one little tidbit here, it's something that the movies cut out, is when Hagrid arrives, he mentions that a young Sirius Black lent him the motorcycle for him to be able to bring Harry to safety here at the Dursleys' house. And now, when I first read these books, I read the first 4 books in 3 days over Thanksgiving weekend. So when I got to book 3 and saw the name Sirius Black, I instantly remembered the name being mentioned here at the beginning, because this was the day after I'd read the Sorcerer's Stone. I was already moved on to Prisoner of Azkaban because I read them that fast. But I imagine had I read these when they first were published, there would have been time between books 1 and book 3, and this is probably something that most people wouldn't even have noticed. And the reason I bring it up here is this is our first real indication of just how good J.K. Rowling is at foreshadowing and world building and plot building. She's already here in chapter 1 laying the foundation for important people and events that come in later books. And these opening chapters in particular, you start to see she's laying a lot of these seeds already, even in the first 3 or 4 chapters. And we also get introduced to the whimsy of this first book. Like Dumbledore has a scar, apparently, that's a perfect map of the London Underground, just above his left knee. Cute little things like that you wouldn't normally see in a big epic fantasy, but again, because this is a children's story, a children's fantasy at this point, you have that things. And you also have the author interjecting, kind of breaking the fourth wall here, just to interject to make a point, which I don't think really occurs in later books. I don't really remember it other than in this first book, but I'll see how that goes as I read forward. And it pretty simple, straightforward, just introducing the characters, introducing the landscape. We know that the Potters, Lily and James, are dead, and that Voldemort had tried to kill Harry, and his curse rebounded and seemingly has destroyed Dumbledore. I mean, not Dumbledore, seemingly has destroyed Voldemort. And then we move on to chapter 2, the Vanishing class. And now it's 10 years later, and now we get to see what Harry Potter's life is like. And he's grown up in a Muggle world with a Muggle life. He doesn't know anything about the wizarding world, doesn't know it exists. But we learn here from the way he's treated, and particularly the way Vernon warns him when they're forced to bring Harry with them to the zoo for Dudley's birthday, that he better not, nothing funny better not happen. So right away you realize that even though Harry is completely ignorant of the fact that he's part of the wizarding world, his latent, inherent natural talents are beginning to manifest themselves without him even knowing about it or intending it. And it's the first hint, really, that the Dursleys are kind of fooling themselves, that this is something they can't ignore, but they're so desperate to ignore it because they don't want anything to do with it. They fear it for their own reasons. And the Dursleys really are a monstrous family. I mean, they shove Harry in a cupboard under the stairs where he spends his first 10 years and treat him horribly. He's there to cook and clean, and they're punishing him for being who he is, for being the son of who he is, though he doesn't know this, of course. But this scene is a quick scene, but the important thing about it is they go to the zoo and we're introduced to Harry wielding powers without him realizing he's wielding powers by making the glass disappear on the snake cage. And then his conversation with the snake. And I like how J.K. Rowling just kind of drops that in there, doesn't make a big deal of it. It's just a thing. But again, she's layering in and building the groundwork for future plot points. Lots of foreshadowing here in these little moments. And total aside, but there's a moment in this chapter where Aunt Petunia's trying to get Harry to put on his sweater, this old sweater of Dudley's that's brown with orange puffs on it. And separately from this, I'm in the middle of rereading Stephen King's It, and just the orange puffs just made me instantly think of It. And then the thought of that creature It being dropped into the wizarding world of Harry Potter and Hogwarts and having to deal with facing all those wizards just kind of made me chuckle. It had nothing to do with these books, but just the orange puffs kind of made me laugh. And then we come now, again, simple couple of chapters, just kind of setting the scene. And then we get to chapter 3, The Letters from No One. Now, I'm really curious, and I want to hear from anyone watching what you think of chapter 3, because I absolutely love this chapter. This is one of my favorite chapters in the book. And I love it for a couple of reasons. One is, first we're introduced to why Harry hates the summer holidays when he's at Hogwarts. Because summer means he's stuck with the Dursleys, stuck with Dudley. And this is from his growing up in that house. This is where this comes from. And we get a little bit of that at the beginning. And we also get Dudley's going to be going off to the smelting school, is the school Vernon went to. And Dudley's going to be going to that school. And of course, Harry's not worthy of that school. So they're going to send him off to some little public school somewhere. But they go and get Dudley's uniform. And I wonder, and I didn't notice it the first time when I read it, or in the movies, the colors of the uniform are maroon and orange. And I wonder, is that sort of like a parody of Gryffindor with the red and gold? And it's kind of like a distorted, silly version of the Gryffindor colors, that here's Dudley in his maroon and orange, silly-looking uniform. And it's kind of a play on that Harry's going to be in House Gryffindor with the red and gold, these like royal colors. So whether that was intentional or not, or she just picked silly-looking colors together to put them together to make Dudley look silly, I don't know. But it kind of struck me as that kind of a parody on Gryffindor. And once the letters start coming, this is where this chapter really takes off for me. Because it's absurd, it's ridiculous. And I love how the address keeps changing on the letters, where it's cupboard under the stairs to smallest bedroom, and then the motel. And Vernon pretty much loses it here. He has like a nervous breakdown and starts going crazy and boards up the house as much as he can to keep the letters out, but they keep coming in. And then he takes his family and he runs, and they're driving and he's crisscrossing and backtracking and trying to lose whoever's following him and delivering these letters. And and the reason why this is such a favorite chapter of mine is, in the midst of this madness of this chapter, this is when the Dursleys went from becoming first like one-dimensional caricatures to people for me in the books. And even though it's for all the wrong reasons, through ignorance, fear, revulsion, even, let's say, bigotry or intolerance, or, you know, any number of reasons, this is the moment where, underneath all of that, you realize that they're just trying to protect Harry. They're trying to keep Harry safe. Even though they mistreat him and punish him for being Lily's son, for being part of that wizarding world. To them, it's a dangerous, dark, dangerous place. And they're trying to protect him from that danger. So even though they're horrible, horrible people, and they're doing it for absolutely every wrong possible reason. Again, fear, bigotry, prejudice, revulsion, you name it. But underneath all of that, they're trying to keep Harry safe. So there is a level of caring about him. Because it would be easy for them to say, oh, Hogwarts wants him. thank God, let's get rid of them, get them out of our lives. That would be the easy thing if they didn't care. And they just happen to be very weak people and not very good people, in that they punish him repeatedly, consistently for 10 straight years for just being born. But underneath all that, they're trying to keep him safe. So that's when they really transformed into people for me. And that's why I love this chapter so much. Now, whether anyone else took that here or not, or whether the Dursleys have always remained just bumbling, one-dimensional characters and nothing real, I don't know. But for me, this was such an important chapter in the opening section of the book because they made that transformation as characters to me. And I don't think Harry realizes, maybe not even until book 7, that underneath all of that, there was that care. But again, and it's just a crazy, absurd chapter where they're running and they end up finally in the shack on the rocks out in the middle of the sea and thinking no one can get to them there. And of course, now we move on to chapter 4 and the Keeper of the Keys, where Harry gets to meet Hagrid. And this, of course, is such a great chapter. I enjoyed it in the movies. I was disappointed how much of the chapter 3 the movies cut out, but I understand for a film, there's no need to spend that much time because you want to get your way to Hogwarts in the movie. But in the book, I enjoyed all of that. But now we're at that shack, and Hagrid shows up as soon as the clock strikes midnight. It's Harry's 11th birthday, and Hagrid kicks the door in, and in he comes. And now this is a really, really cool scene because we start to finally learn. We learn that Harry learns who he is, that he's a wizard. He's going to be going off to Hogwarts. He learns about what really happened to Lily and James, his parents. He learns about Voldemort and what happened that night. And we're introduced here to the central mystery of the whole series of what happened that night. Why did Voldemort's killing curse strike Harry and rebound and seemingly kill Voldemort instead? Which really is a central mystery at the heart of the whole series. And though you may not realize it, especially as a younger reader, you realize that Voldemort can't be gone because Harry's now taken his first steps down a road that inevitably, inexorably has to end with him and Voldemort returning to that confrontation and having it a second time. This time as wizard to wizard. And this really is, again, it may only be in the back of the mind that has to happen at this point, but Harry's path is set here as soon as he hears about who he is, and he knows he's going to go to that school and follow in his parents. And it's still very much a children's story at this point, but this is our first glimpse at what's to come and really the seriousness of the conflict that kind of underlies everything as we slowly move forward into this fantastical world. And then what I thought was really interesting, we get to see Petunia herself and her motivations as well, and that they're ugly when it comes to her sister. There's a deep fear and revulsion and probably jealousy over Lily and what Lily was able to do. But even through that, just ugly, ugly, ugly emotions of Petunia, she's also trying to save her nephew from that world because she only sees horrific, evil, terrible things there. And she's even more forceful about it in how she feels on the inside. Vernon, I think, fears it, and she just finds it revolting and just horrific and repellent. But again, all the wrong reasons, but trying to keep him safe. We see more of that here. And then we also learn, and this is an important part, and again, more foreshadowing, more story building, more world building. We learn Hagrid had been a student and expelled in his 3rd year. And again, kind of an aside, students can do bad things and get thrown out of the school. And it also sets up really we're again layering in book 2 right here. Again, this is the big transitional chapter where Muggle Harry's, the life of a Muggle Harry is now pretty much gone. And we're about to take our first steps into the wizarding world. And that's chapter 5 with Diagon. And this is the first glimpse of the wizarding world itself, where Hagrid takes Harry the next day off to the Leaky Cauldron, and Harry starts to realize that he's not going to enter this world without anyone noticing. Because instantly, as soon as they walk into the Leaky Cauldron, the people in there know who he is, and they all start coming up to him and shaking his hand, and some of them are crying, and it's a big, powerful, emotional moment for the wizarding world itself that Harry's coming to Hogwarts. And it's going to be tough on Harry because, you're the new kid joining a new school, and you don't know anything about this world you're about to enter, and every single person in that world has heard of you. And we get our first glimpse of that and what it's going to end up doing to Harry as a person and his personality and everyone and how they treat him. So we're just getting the first inkling of that here. And then we get Diagon Alley itself and all the shops and just the wonder, a sheer wonder of that street. I mean, you could just spend all day there. And then Gringotts. And again, we go right to J.K. Rowling layering in world building, building plots, setting things up for future, and how Hagrid makes a point of telling Harry there's no safer place to keep something safe than to keep it in Gringotts, and that it's madness to try to steal anything from it. Which, of course, sets up later events in this book, and particularly a major part of book 7. And again, right away, we see her just putting these things in here and doing a really, really, really good job of not just world building and introducing us to these places, but dropping in little snippets into each one she does introduce that are setting up where they become central to the story. And really, really well done over this first opening section of the book. And we also get, though we don't get his name, we get Harry and Draco Malfoy meeting for the first time, though we don't get told that it is Draco Malfoy until later, when Harry goes in to get his uniform. And Hagrid's popped off to get a nip, which is Hagrid being Hagrid, and just, yes, so here's the wizarding world, Harry, let me introduce you, and I'm going to be back, you'll be fine. And he goes off to get a drink. And Harry and this kid, and now Rowling here sets up, you're not to like him. Rowling sets this scene up where you're not to like this kid. And this is one of the things I'm really, really looking forward to in this reread, is Draco Malfoy, because he's a kid you're not supposed to like. She writes him to not like him. Right away in this introduction, we don't even get his name yet, and she's already letting us know he's not to be liked. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out as the series goes. Is it going to be ham-fisted or ham-handed, whichever the proper word is here, how she does it? Or is she going to balance it out enough where there'll be some empathy or sympathy there with Draco? Because it's easy to kind of look at him as the Harry Potter world's Joffrey, if you will, to do a Song of Ice and Fire kind of reference. Even though he's nowhere near monstrous as Joffrey or Ramsay or any of those people. But I'm really looking forward to Draco and seeing how he comes across now that I know the story, know what happens, but I'm taking my time here. And that's, again, one of the reasons I wanted to do this, is to really be able to pay attention, slow down, and pay attention to the story itself, but also how Rowling writes the story, how she introduces the characters, how she describes them. Because right away, we learn, oh, he's kind of like Dudley, so we're not to like him. But we also learn here about there are prejudices in the wizarding world itself as well. And there's a sort of a hierarchical structure in the Wizarding Society, where this obviously is an important family with a capital I, where there's sort of seemingly a caste system here, to a degree. So again, very well done. We get just enough of Draco without being told who he is to know that there's sort of a staggered layers of, there's wizards up here and there's wizards down here, and there's the privileged wizards and the less privileged wizards and the ones who shouldn't be there, and prejudices. So you get a lot packed into just this little moment. And of course you're told, don't like this kid. But a nice introduction, and I like the fact that we don't know who he is yet, that we learn that later. And then of course the wand. And I love the scene in Ollivanders. Ollivander is a really interesting little character, the way she describes him, the way Harry doesn't really know what to think about him. And of course the going through all the wands and then figuring out which wand, and it's the wand chooses the wizard, which seems like just a cool little thing. Oh, that sounds really cool. The wand chooses the wizard. And did J.K. Rowling know when she wrote that line what it meant? Or is it just part of the writer's mind that your brain stores that away and starts percolating on that? And it may be a few years before it's done. And then it says, brain goes, okay, remember that little neat little thing that sounded cool? Well, here's how that's like a centerpiece. Because a lot of writing, and I'm not a published author or anything, but I enjoy writing. I've been writing a long time. And I've had plenty of moments where I'll just have a little snippet thrown in, and it might be 15 years later when I'll be in the shower or on my way to work. And all of a sudden, my brain will go, hey, I've been thinking about that thing over here for 15 years, and knock, knock, knock. This is what it means. So I wonder if that's one of those moments. It kind of seems like it was a cool little thing to put in. So I wonder, was it just a cool little thing, or was it that central to the story as it really is? So I haven't researched this stuff to find out if anyone's asked her that question and if she's actually answered it or not. Whether she doesn't have to answer it. She doesn't have to talk about how she developed this and when she came up with these things, because it really doesn't matter. Just from a writer's perspective, those are the things I like to know. And that's pretty much it. That's the kind of my impressions of rereading the first 5 chapters for the very first time doing this reread. It feels strange to stop and close that book and not keep going like I did the first time. But that's the whole point of why I'm doing it this way, because if I didn't, I'd probably be done reading this book by the time I'm done finishing this recording here and editing it and uploading it. And I want to take my time. So again, this was episode 1 out of a 52-part series. I hope you'll stick with me every Sunday as I read these books over the next year. Next Sunday is chapters 6 through 9. I'm looking forward to those, where we finally make our way to Hogwarts. And so I'm just going to wrap this up for now before I start rambling incoherently. I'm Charles of Sir Booksage. Like and subscribe. Follow me on this journey. Let me know your thoughts about this book in particular, these 5 chapters in particular. If any of you are going to follow along and read as I read each week, you're welcome to. I'll be letting you know in each video what the next chapters are going to be. Like here, it's chapters 6 through 9 for next Sunday. And I guess that's it. I will see you next Sunday, and I'll also see you during the week on my other regular videos I do for my BookTube channel. I am Charles of Sir Booksage, and happy reading.